Callie House, also known as Callie House Pickett, was an African-American activist and pioneer in the reparations movement. She was born on January 20, 1861, in Rutherford County, Tennessee, during the era of slavery in the United States. House is best known for her efforts in advocating for reparations for formerly enslaved African Americans. In the late 19th century, Callie House became a leading figure in the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association, NEMP, an organization she co-founded in 1898. The NEMP aimed to secure pensions for formerly enslaved individuals and their descendants as a form of compensation for their unpaid labor during slavery. House traveled extensively throughout the United States, collecting testimonies and organizing support for reparations. House faced significant opposition from both the government and prominent African American leaders of the time, who believed that her efforts were unrealistic or could potentially harm the progress made in the aftermath of slavery. Despite the challenges, House continued to champion the cause of reparations and advocate for the rights of African Americans. Her work eventually led to a congressional investigation into the issue of reparations in 1898. While the investigation did not result in reparations being granted, House's efforts laid the foundation for future discussions and activism around reparations. Callie House passed away on June 28, 1928, but her legacy as an early advocate for reparations remains an important part of African American history and the ongoing dialogue on racial justice in the United States. Callie House was not directly put in jail by J. Edgar Hoover. However, J. Edgar Hoover, as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, for nearly 5 decades, played a significant role in surveilling and targeting various civil rights activists, including those involved in the reparations movement. During the early 20th century, the FBI, under Hoover's leadership, engaged in extensive surveillance and monitoring of individuals and organizations perceived as threats to the status quo or the government's interests. This included keeping tabs on activists advocating for civil rights, social justice, and progressive causes. While there is no specific information indicating that J. Edgar Hoover targeted Callie House personally, it is possible that her activities and involvement in the reparations movement may have drawn the attention of the FBI. Given the FBI's history of targeting civil rights activists during that time, it is likely that House and others associated with the movement were subjected to surveillance and potential harassment by the agency. It's worth noting that the FBI's actions during Hoover's tenure have been heavily criticized for their infringement on civil liberties and the abuse of power. However, specific details regarding any actions taken against Callie House by the FBI or J. Edgar Hoover would require further research into historical records and sources. Callie House did not personally sue the U.S. government after the Civil War. However, Callie House was involved in advocating for reparations for formerly enslaved African Americans, and her efforts were centered around seeking compensation from the U.S. government. Following the Civil War and the abolition of slavery in the United States, there were discussions and debates about compensating formerly enslaved individuals for their unpaid labor. Many African Americans believed they were entitled to reparations for the economic and social injustices they had endured during slavery. Callie House was a prominent figure in the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association, NEMP, which she co-founded. The NEMP aimed to secure pensions for formerly enslaved individuals and their descendants as a form of compensation for their years of unpaid labor. While the NEMP advocated for reparations, it did not file a lawsuit against the U.S. government. It's important to note that the issue of reparations for slavery remains a complex and ongoing topic of discussion and debate. While there have been various individual lawsuits and legal efforts related to reparations over the years, there has been no comprehensive lawsuit brought by Callie House or any singular figure against the U.S. government for reparations on behalf of all African Americans. The reparations movement continues to evolve with new initiatives and discussions taking place in contemporary times. The topic of reparations for slavery and the role of Callie House in advocating for compensation is a significant aspect of African American history and the ongoing dialogue on racial justice. While Callie House did not personally sue the U.S. government, her work with the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief, Bounty, and Pension Association, NEMP, contributed to the broader movement seeking reparations. The NEMP, under House's leadership, aimed to address the economic injustices suffered by formerly enslaved individuals and their descendants. They sought to obtain pensions for elderly ex-slaves who had endured years of unpaid labor and harsh conditions during slavery. The organization also sought to raise awareness about the long-lasting effects of slavery and the need for redress. Callie House and the NEMP faced significant challenges and opposition in their quest for reparations. Government officials and some African American leaders of the time argued that reparations were not feasible or could impede progress in the post-slavery era. The prevailing sentiment at the time was focused on moving forward rather than looking back. Despite the obstacles, House traveled extensively throughout the United States, collecting testimonials from elderly ex-slaves and organizing support for reparations. She aimed to bring attention to the struggles faced by African Americans, emphasizing the economic deprivation caused by generations of unpaid labor. While the NEMP's efforts did not result in the government granting reparations, they played a crucial role in laying the groundwork for future discussions on the topic. Callie House's advocacy helped bring attention to the historical and ongoing systemic inequalities faced by African Americans and contributed to the broader dialogue on racial justice and reparations. In recent years, the issue of reparations has gained renewed attention and support, with the growing recognition of the need to address the long-standing economic and social disparities rooted in slavery and its aftermath. Today, discussions on reparations encompass a range of proposals, including financial compensation, educational initiatives, and systemic reforms aimed at rectifying historical injustices. Callie House's work and the reparations movement she was part of continue to inspire and shape the ongoing efforts towards achieving racial justice and equality in the United States.